My story. How did this all start? I suppose my journey is not dissimilar to many dentists. I started to learn about early intervention through MyoBrace, and John Flutter and Chris Farrow, the inventor, looked at treatments, ALF, cranial osteopathy, and I bounced around from country to country. Australia is the home for Chris Farrell's processes. ALF, I went to the west coast of Canada. I went to Chicago to learn about cranial osteopathy. But a lot of it was driven by my TMD and sleep work through Professor Steve Olmos from Arizona. The training was, of course, focused on managing pain for TMD issues and sleep disorders. One of the things that we focused on was, how do we cure these problems? And the answer is you can't. You can. It's palliative care. It's just management. And Professor Olmos basically laughed and said, look, if you can't treat early, then you can't hope to cure. And that drew me to exploring early intervention. Eventually, I stumbled across John Mew's work, and he was, of course, based in the UK, but he had published his book on Orthotropics, which is growth guidance therapy. And we learned that there was a community in North America. It's driven by Dr. Bill Hang, and in Europe by John and Mike Mew. And they created a system between the many decades of experience that they had into how to control vertical growth and how to make changes that are consistent in not relapsing. So I journeyed through many courses. I traveled constantly for many, many years. It would be like I'd pop on a plane, I'd fly to Los Angeles, I'd spend 2 days, I'd hop on a plane, I would fly home to Melbourne, and then I would start work on Monday. And when I finished Bill Hang's program, I flew over and did Mike Mew's program in London. And I would hop on a plane and I would fly to London and I would do 4 days and then hop on a plane, fly home, and then get back to work. And that was my life for about 3, maybe even 4 years. It took a long time to work out how to use this information. And, John became a mentor, Bill became a mentor. And my questions were, this is how we start, but how do we finish these cases? And John was always encouraging, but he really did insist that we discover for ourselves how these programs progress and develop and how each case is different in its finish for each of the families that you actually treat. It did mean a lot of trial and error, and it meant a lot of frustration. And it meant that there was always that underlying feeling that even though there are many, many decades of people experiencing this process, it's still very vague on how to be consistent with the results. There are very few practices that run growth guidance as a primary service, the only service that they have. The orthodontic community makes it difficult because we aren't trained as dentists to have any real understanding of orthodontics. The orthotropic process, the middle part is very difficult. We can start it, but it gets confused. The treatment seems to stall in very many cases. And it seems to stall because it's a very long process. The endurance component of this treatment is something that isn't discussed a lot, but runs front and foremost when you're actually in the treatment. We also need, of course, the hand and eye skills to be able to process this information and convert it into practice. I persisted. I found that after about 5 years of this practice, I became quite consistent with my finishes. I documented my cases, as we all should. When I compared the process of how I finished these cases compared to my orthodontic finishes, I realized that I was as consistent with my goal achievements in orthotropics as I was in my goal achievements in orthodontics. Now, we all have no issues achieving our goals in orthodontics because there's very defined guidelines, there's very defined parameters, there's very defined protocols. So I began to put together the equivalent for orthotropic practice, and in doing so I became more and more focused on orthotropic treatment until I eventually made the decision to run a full-time orthotropic clinic. I started to realize that the research basis for orthotropics is limited, so I gathered my records and I made the decision that we were going to use my clinical success in understanding what was achieved, whether it was just a rose-colored glasses viewpoint from my own perspective, or whether there was real change in the growth. During this period, I began a collaboration with Dr. Sandra Khan, who is the orthodontist based in California, that I co-authored our book, GoPEX. We began the process of teaching. She'd been teaching for decades, and she introduced me to that concept that, we should share this information. We initially focused on the Spanish orthodontic community, and we helped an experienced group of orthodontists and pediatric dentists who were based predominantly in Spain to learn about the work that I've been doing. And through Sandra's connections, I was able to, with her, develop a module in the University of Valencia's orthodontic postgraduate program. And we trained the residents there in orthodontics. We started research projects at the university, and that created an interest in the results that were generated. And now we have the opportunity to work with the University of Alberta in Canada, and we have the opportunity to work with UNAM based in Mexico City, at the university there. And we're starting to work with other North American universities to try to figure out what is special or different about orthotropics, and are the claims valid. My experience in teaching is different to my clinical work and the research projects that we're doing. Teaching brings on different challenges compared to clinical practice and research practice. We realized that orthodontics is very different to orthotropics. It's almost like it's a completely different subset of the discipline. So we knew that unless we were able to support the claims, until we found literature to give evidence basis to what we were doing, until we were able to handhold and directly supervise these students, even if they were seasoned orthodontists, we would not be able to succeed in teaching this program. What I did after spending time with the specialist orthodontist and the specialist pediatric dentist is make the decision to roll out the program in modules. We needed to build a foundation Just because you have experience in orthodontics does not mean that you are well versed in early intervention, and it doesn't mean that you understand a completely different discipline which is focused on a different concept of treatment. Postural orthodontics, we changed the focus to a component within orthotropics. This foundation of taking concepts of growth, tying it with how the body uses posture to change, and creating a pathway that provides safe transition, a bridge, if you like, from the traditional orthodontic views to the sometimes outlying orthotropic views. The program was one that I made a decision that would take many years of building foundation. We wanted to begin with John's tropic premise, where the change in posture can change the growth dimensions, and correct posture allowing the body to achieve its genetic balance. We knew that we had to modify some of the traditional early intervention orthodontic therapies and focus on producing results that were consistent with what we saw using the broader techniques that are available in orthotropics. My program in early intervention is very different to the ones that I had attended myself. The early intervention programs that I've always been to have been very uplifting. They have been very encouraging. They really drive home the point that if we don't take action, then the children miss out. My goal, of course, I realized, was to make it safe. And making it safe is very different to giving it a go. I have a tendency to be very cautious, and that translates to me throttling down my students' enthusiasm. I don't want them to make poor choices based on emotion and not facts. I want them to achieve their goals every single time. The discipline that is needed to make a correct diagnosis and to present a treatment that is suitable for that diagnosis so that you will achieve the promise of the goal that you have explained is your plan. It's very difficult for us to say no. And sometimes when the treatment is beyond your capacity, when the treatment is not possible, you have to be able to recognize this, and you have to develop that discipline. Many of us do this because we care. Sometimes not understanding that caring requires us to be able to set realistic expectations, even if they're disappointing, is part of the process of looking after someone. The program that I created, I've systematically spread into multiple phases. There's an introduction initial module, the 2-day introduction to postural orthodontics. We have added in Q&A sessions to help expand on some of the issues that can sometimes arise in your thinking process, but is not enough time during a 2-day program to be able to be worked out. Q&A time tends to be very short. We wanted to give people a fuller opportunity, a fuller body answered, so to speak, to their questions. We then created an advanced module and multiple advanced modules. Phase 1, 2, Phase 3. We started the process of not only delivering programs, but we recorded the sessions as well, so that now we have modules that can be viewed with time to review, time to revisit, time to work at the pace that suits you. When we turn up at lectures, we are given a pad and a pen. And sometimes that's not enough. Sometimes we need the opportunity to ask questions. Sometimes we need the opportunity to review the lecture itself. What did we miss? And creating a combined program where we have live attendance, live streaming, recordings, and session notes and clinical manuals. I felt that I needed to do this to turn it into something greater than just a weekend lecture. We know that this is a hands-on, wet-handed process. So we created practice visits into my clinics. We want doctors who are serious to be able to see how a practice runs when it's focused just on early intervention. We want people to be able to get a sense of what the environment is, what the family's attitudes are, how we interact with patients, how we interact with staff, doing something that's very different to what most of us are trained to do. We have, of course, live attendance, but recordings of those attendance because not everyone can fly to Melbourne, Australia. The process of the training in the advanced modules is very different to the lecture type programs in the introduction course. We have a more of a mentorship based process, one where we revisit in a study group arrangement on a fortnightly basis, and I give people the opportunity to submit cases on a weekly basis. And we want to give real-time feedback on what's going on. We want the opportunity to feel like when the doctors start their treatments, that they have someone to supervise the progress in the cases. We want people to interact with their peers, and the groups that are formed in these advanced modules start to bounce ideas off each other, as all study groups are designed for. We have a fourth module called the Phase 4, in which we prepare in more depth the business side of how to take what we've learned and make a real change in the practice, one that includes the financial aspect of what we charge, how we present that figure, and how to accept rejection and how to move on from rejection. We try to get a sense of living in a world today where we aren't just doctors who work on patients, but business owners who have to look after staff, business owners who have to make the practice successful, so that the people who we can service and help aren't forced to bear the entire brunt of our debt. We want the practice to run so that everyone wins. We want the staff to feel like they belong and are included. We want the patients to feel like they can trust you, that you will provide the result that you claim is possible. And we want you to feel like you can deliver on your promises. So the program is one that eventually leads on to complex cases. And we eventually will start the process of bridging the gap between orthodontics to postural orthodontics to orthotropics, where we can change the direction of vertical growth. We can change the rotation of the maxilla and the mandible and achieve the goal that we all talk about but never really seem to deliver. Postural orthodontics. This could be a new beginning, and I hope to see you in our 2-day introduction course soon.